Hello, and welcome to the Route 50 Pulse Check, a new interview series focused on highlighting how mayors, governors, and county executives are stepping up to address some of the most pressing issues of the day. My name is Alicia Powell Gillis, and I am the senior editor at Route 50. Joining me for this edition of Pulse Check is Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller. Mayor Keller, thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Let's get started. So obviously the most predominant news story of this year has been around the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just want to get a sense from you now that we're approaching 7 months into the response, where is Albuquerque today and how has the city's response been going?
Well, I think for all of us, it's been, a struggle to manage through the crisis, of course. But in our city, we've really tried to carve our own path. And so we've, borrowed different ideas from other cities. We've also come up with maybe some that work here. And we have liberally used our emergency powers. So we do in Albuquerque have that ability. And that has really, I think in many ways, gotten our city through some tough times, because the crisis revealed like real cracks in our community, and I think nationwide, but also here for the most vulnerable especially. And so for us, we did move quickly to dole out a couple of $1 million in aid to businesses, about almost now 1 million senior meals that we've been able to put out. And we were early on, we had a cache of reserves in our emergency operations center of PPE. So we had like a couple of container loads. And so we were able to get that out very quickly. So we had, I think, some strong moves early on that have really helped us get through this. And so we seem actually right now to be emerging, at least on a relative basis, in a little bit stronger position. And so we feel optimistic, at least about our ability to be resilient over the long term.
Well, speaking of that, since you obviously had a very strong foundation to build off of, now that we are in the fall season and we are already starting to see some cities and states seeing an uptick in their COVID-19, suggesting that a new wave is not far behind. So as you move into the fall, what are you concerned about in terms of how you will continue to kind of go with the strong foundation that you have and still be able to kind of weather this storm, for lack of a better word, in case the fall and winter are as bad as some medical experts are predicting?
Well, we're in the state of New Mexico, and we do have a state public health order that actually, I think wisely, we worked with the governor on this, has been very gradual. So I think what we learned in that summer kind of spike is that when we decided to start reopening up again, right around August, Labor Day, that kind of thing, New Mexico's actually gone very, very slow. And I think this bodes well. And so the city is following suit. So we basically have really had a focus on compliance instead of punishment. And that's been really a method to deal with corona fatigue. So, we're not fining everyone all the time, but we are like kind of forcing them to comply. So like once you put on your mask, you're fine. And, once you get the right number of chairs in your restaurant, or, you're fine. And so I think that has enabled us to not create quite the acrimonious relationship that we might see in other places. So that's been one area that's helped. I think the other one is we really kind of informally sort of cross-deputized a lot of civilian departments to do enforcement. So our enforcement is mostly now being handled by our fire marshal's office and by our code enforcement office and even by our environmental health office. So we're not using police officers to do it. And that one has helped the police focus on crime, but also we haven't run up against, I think, a lot of those situations that can escalate when law enforcement's involved. So, and it's been a good way also to keep some of our folks working who otherwise, might not have the same role because their particular department might be closed, for example. So that's helped a lot too.
So on the topic of law enforcement, obviously another major topic this year has been policing in America and how it relates to communities of color. So I'm curious, hearing your example of saying that you've moved away for COVID reasons to not just focus this on having police try to enforce. Are there other ways that you are exploring finding ways to find alternative means to certain responses that have been left to law enforcement to handle? Are you exploring new departments or new shifting of services in Albuquerque as a result?
Yes, and we actually came out quite bold on this issue back in July. And it was interesting because we had been practicing and piloting having an alternative response for a lot of different community interactions. And for example, in our homeless community, instead of having officers go out, we've been trying to have social workers paired with also folks who are just checking to see if they, just need something basic like here, you can go to this particular shelter or whatever. And we've been really moving over the last year that part to civilianize it. We've also been trying to do things differently with mental health and behavioral health. And what happened is actually the Black Lives Matter movement really helped empower us and in many ways gave us the political courage to go a huge step forward. And so we're now creating a new department called the Community Safety Department. And it is a third response to 911. So when you call 911, you get police, fire, or community safety. And so they're all civilians, they're not armed, and they have varying degrees of training. So we still have that challenge with, are we sending out somebody to pick up needles in a park, or are we sending out a mental health professional? But, roughly around 100 folks are involved in this new department. It's about a $10 million budget. It's still in the works. We hope to really launch it in January, but we're committed to this idea, and it is coordinated again with 911 dispatch. So the idea is we know from our pilots, we pulled 6,000 calls that sent police to someone who's down and out to an emergency room. We've been able, through our pilot programs, to pull that many out of police and fire and actually get them the help that they need and not clog up emergency rooms. So it's an example, I think, of us really trying to step up and do something differently. I mean, we haven't, at least in Albuquerque, we have never had a response to 911 that is not police or fire. So it's a big change. It's a cabinet level change. And I hope it's something that's going to have lasting impact in a positive way.
Speaking of lasting impact, obviously, again, as I alluded to earlier, racism has been a major topic this year with COVID, with the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor murders. And I'm just curious to hear, as you obviously are working towards some sort of racial healing in like the initiative you just alluded to, I'm just curious to know what your big picture vision is for addressing institutionalized racism in your city and what you hope racial healing will look like in your city.
Each city is different. And here in New Mexico, we have big challenges around racism. We are a minority majority city and actually have been since we were founded over 300 years ago. So we have this additional dynamic, like we have conquistador problems as opposed to Confederacy problems, but they are still problems. And in some ways they're similar because it is about oppression and so forth. So we're dealing with these issues primarily by having community-wide healing sessions that are really designed for thousands of people to engage in so that we can have the depth of the discussion that we need in our town, because in our case, it is several levels of colonial scars on top of more traditional anti-Blackness. But those are actually, we have all of that on top of our own history. So what we're doing, actually, we have this process set up where we're trying to coordinate even during Corona. Any group that wants to be heard is being heard by both myself and city council through this healing and reconciliation process. And so then that's going to move into then, what action should we take and so forth. So one is we try to cast a huge net on that front. But the other one is equity and inclusion. So when I came in, we started this equity and inclusion office, and everyone literally, some people laughed at us. Some people said, what does that mean? And it has never proven more important and valuable than during these times, because that office has really been able to take the advocacy passion and try and match that with action. So whether it's police reform and doing, we're 7 out of 8 on 8 Can't Wait, or whether it's now we have equity training in our police academy, and we also have anti-racism training at City Hall. I took it myself. I think we have about 20% of the city employees who've gone through it. So we're trying to institutionalize anti-racism just as much as racism has been institutionalized for centuries. And so I think at least we're being proactive, and we just continue to listen and adapt. I think that's also the most important thing.
Right. So switching gears, especially because you mentioned several programs, and I would be remiss if we didn't bring up the economic aspect of the last 7 months. So I'm curious to hear from you, just what has the impact looked like in Albuquerque? How is that affecting the delivery of services, government services in your city? And then also, while there may be some dim hope that federal aid will be on the way, if it continues to be delayed, how will that affect your ability to continue delivering any of the services that you're offering at this point?
Well, I think we were fortunate early on that we cut about $40 million out of our budget, primarily through travel, not doing new contracts, trimming a lot of fat, sort of. But we also been in a hiring freeze, and that has saved us a lot of money. It obviously puts stresses on city services, but we haven't had to furlough folks or we haven't had to do layoffs. And that's really important because I think we're one of the top 10 employers, certainly in Albuquerque, if not the state of New Mexico. So for us, just keeping running and not having to do that is a victory. But there are some measures on fiscal health. And if you look at our sort of deficits, we're actually the second best among major cities in America. So Boston, credit to you, they're number one. And so our problems just aren't as big financially. And that also is because the chunk of money we got from the feds early on was 150 million. And proportionally for us, that helped a lot. I mean, we would be totally underwater without that. But that was the right amount for us. I know some cities didn't get as much as they wanted. For us, we got exactly what we needed. But we do know this, in about, let's say, about 10 to 18 months, we'll be in a terrible position. And that's why we need that second round of federal funding. Because I think now we're realizing that we're going to have to get through this with that kind of Nike swoosh recovery instead of the V recovery. And so we are very concerned about 18 months down the road.
I like the Nike swoosh description instead. I think that's more relatable. So when you think about the 18 months, can you go a little bit deeper into exactly what concerns you have and what's the worst case scenario, for lack of a better word?
Well, for us, our revenues, every city is different, and we have revenues. Most of our revenues is based on sales tax, and a lot of that is driven by tourism. And so when we miss, like we're missing Balloon Fiesta normally would be happening right now in Albuquerque. I mean, that is like 20% of our economy. It's such a huge deal. So when that doesn't happen, like if that were to not happen 2 years in a row, I mean, you're literally just talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that never show up in Albuquerque. So the question is then, how do you replace that? You really can't. Like there is no internal economic growth engine that can ever replace $100 million of tourist revenue. So for us, like that's a good example. We would plug that with stimulus. We basically say, well, you were using the stimulus to replace what we lost by not having Balloon Fiesta. So that's a good example of just these. We do have some big holes that if we miss those events, we have massive holes in our revenue stream. The other aspect is just that, we, like many cities, have collective bargaining agreements and so forth. So we have a fairly fixed wage scale. And so it's not like we can start trimming wages. So we don't have a choice. We either have to lay off people or we have to keep paying them. We can't just pay them less. And so without that option, again, we need that, or else we have to do layoffs. We have to say, I wish I could just dock your pay, but unfortunately I just have to lay you off. That's terrible, right? But this is a common reality for cities, and it's a choice that we should never have to make as long as we have state and federal partners helping us.
I heard you mention Balloon Fiesta, and I want to bring up that because obviously large-scale events have been put on a hold. A lot of large-scale events have been put on a hold. But are there ways to adapt events to fit within a COVID world? Maybe it doesn't do the revenue aspect as you're talking about, but it still allows you to continue your traditions and maintain your traditions, but also think about people's health and wellness at the same time.
It's we're doing it this weekend. So instead of Balloon Fiesta, we are having Balloon Fest. It's close. It's just not as big. And so, what we're basically doing, our city, I think, has done a good job of this. We will do any event we can under the public health order. So we now have dozens of balloons going up in the sky every weekend in Albuquerque for the next 2 weekends. And they're launching from different places instead of all at once. And they will also be in sort of their chase crew pods, so they're not mixing with other crews, which normally you'd have a lot of socializing and so forth. And then the biggest thing is the public, which you can do with balloons, you're just supposed to watch from home or your street or a park. We're not going to, we have this giant balloon fiesta grounds, and so we're not having that. And so again, those are just ways to essentially reduce spread. And so our city actually, I think if you compare us to some regional cities, we have, for example, a positivity rate of about 2%. I think the closest city to us might be Denver with 4.4%. We're doing double, 3 times, 4 times as good as our neighbors. But I think it's because of measures like that. We're just not messing around with mass events and bars as well. I mean, I got to tell you, anywhere there's high intensity and there's a high number of people, we're just not doing it. But where we're trying to find alternatives like drive-in movies, which all of a sudden are wildly popular, we're all for it. And we've waived every permitting possible to do that. We allow restaurants to do anything they want outside, in the street, on the sidewalk, in their parking lot. We've waived all those fees, and we even pay for their tent. But we don't allow them to have more than 25%. So I think that's really helped us, and a nod to our weather, which enables all of that.
Excellent. So just as we're coming to the end of our time, 2 final questions. Obviously, this year has been a tremendous test of leadership. So I'm just curious, how has this year maybe changed or reinforced your notion of what it means to be a leader?
Well, it's been, I think, a little bit like a dog year. So I think it's been the equivalent of 7 real years for sure. And for me, it's also been very clarifying. I think Corona, in some ways, as tragic it has been for leaders, it's really helped us prioritize. And so actually has the fight for social justice. And so we're able to do things both from a social justice perspective, from a reform perspective. Like I mentioned, the new department we're creating, those would not be possible had there not been national will and outcry for these kinds of ideas. And so I think that's a very positive outcome. And so far in our city, it's playing out in results as opposed to just wait and see. And Corona, I think, is similar. We've been able to demonstrate that working from home works for a lot of people. But I think we also understand that you have to think of all of society. So like we have had a major challenge around single parents where staying home is a luxury. And so we've said as a city, like, we will take care of your children. We've took care of 10,000 kids of essential workers all summer. And if we didn't do that, those essential workers literally would not have been there to take care of us. And that's something that, again, I think it's just the reality that we have to acknowledge. Why people are in certain situations is a different question. We have to step up today and help them. And that's what we've been trying to do. And I think that is something where even if you're for opening schools or against opening schools, we've got to remember the people who literally run our hospitals and the people who run all our essential services have children. And if they're a single parent, there's nothing for them to do. So we have to enable them. So it's really understanding the individual's situation. What can I do to help that person go to work to help our city? In our town, it's been the city should take care of your child. That's what we've been stepping up to do.
So my last question, as you said, it's been a tragic year. It's been a tough year, but I'd like to end this on more of a positive note, and just to kind of get a sense from you, even with all the tragedy and difficulties that we've all faced, what are you optimistic for the future?
Well, just from a Albuquerque-centric perspective, I am optimistic about Albuquerque. I think we've just demonstrated that our health rates with respect to positive cases, available hospital beds, positivity rates, we're doing quite well compared to other cities. And again, I know that is unfortunate for other cities. But if we can keep these numbers up, I think we're just demonstrating that we're a healthier place to live in a pandemic. And for a town that's had a challenged economy for 10 years, challenges with crime for 10 years, we need some good news and we need to be good at something. And I think we're proving we are a great place to live during a pandemic.
Well, Mayor Keller, thank you so much for joining me today, and look forward to seeing all the wonderful work you continue to do in Albuquerque. And I hope Balloon Fest is a resounding success. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
And now a word from our underwriters.
Hi, I'm Ann Duncan. I'm a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Dell Technologies, and I'm part of a team of Chief Strategy and Innovation Officers. And our role is to help state and local government CIOs be more effective. We help them by delivering the Dell value proposition from the edge to the core to the cloud. Today, Rob Silverberg, who is responsible for our Digital Cities Initiative, is going to tell us a little more about that.
Thank you, Ann. And hi, everyone. Rob Silverberg. I lead the Dell Technologies focus for digital cities for North America. I've been focused on our smart city strategy for the last 5 years. And what I've seen is that there's been a great evolution over the last few years in terms of what was experiments with technology several years ago are now producing real actionable results for our city customers. The sort of results that we're seeing are improvements in transportation, improvements in public safety, the ability to become a more data-driven city, and leveraging new data sources from connected devices, as well as data sources from across the city organization for actionable intelligence. So the real outcomes that we're working on and hoping to work on with our city customers going forward are producing real manageable results from our smart city initiatives.